James Harrison never expected to become the owner of an alien dog. The creature had quite literally fallen from the sky during last year's meteor shower, crash-landing in his backyard garden in a pod that looked more like a piece of living crystal than any spacecraft he'd ever seen in movies. The being inside, which he named Nexus, resembled a large canine, but its fur shifted colors like oil on water, and its eyes held an intelligence that sometimes made James wonder who was really taking care of whom. Life in the quiet suburbs of Portland had changed dramatically since that night. As a single father working from home as a software developer, James appreciated having another presence in the house while his daughter Rachel was at school. Nexus proved to be more than just company. The alien canine helped with household chores using its telekinetic abilities, watched over Rachel when she played in the yard, and seemed to understand English perfectly, even though it couldn't speak. But lately, something had changed. Nexus had become agitated, pacing the house at night and growling at seemingly nothing. The creature's fur, usually a peaceful swirl of blues and purples, had started showing streaks of warning red. James initially dismissed it as some sort of seasonal behavior. After all, what did he know about alien dog biology? But when Nexus started trying to prevent Rachel from going to school, parking itself in front of the door and whining pitifully, James began to worry. "Come on, boy, she has to go to class," James said one morning, gently trying to move the immovable alien dog from the doorway. Nexus's fur rippled with crimson patterns, and its 6 eyes, arranged in a symmetric pattern across its face, all focused on James with an intensity that made him step back. Rachel, 12 years old and already showing signs of her mother's practical nature, knelt beside Nexus. "Dad, I don't think this is normal. Nexus has never acted like this before." She ran her hands through the creature's color-shifting fur, and the red patterns briefly softened to orange before intensifying again. James sighed, checking his watch. "Rachel, you've already missed 2 days this week because of Nexus's behavior. I can't let you miss another." He pulled out his phone to call a rideshare service. "We'll go out the back door. I'm taking you to school myself today." Nexus's reaction was immediate and frightening. The alien dog leaped between them and the back door, its usual soft whimpers replaced by a deep, resonating growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. The sound carried undertones that made James's teeth ache and caused the windows to rattle in their frames. Okay. James held up his hands, stepping back. "Rachel, honey, maybe you can do your schoolwork online today. I'll email your teachers." The growling stopped, and Nexus's fur gradually shifted back to its usual peaceful colors, though James noticed that red undertones remained, pulsing like warning lights beneath the surface. That night, after Rachel had gone to bed, James sat down with his unusual pet. "What's going on, boy? You've got to give me something to work with here." Nexus met his gaze, and James felt the familiar gentle pressure in his mind that indicated the alien was trying to communicate. Usually, these interactions resulted in clear images or emotions, but tonight all he received was a sense of urgent danger and glimpses of something moving beneath the ground. James rubbed his temples, frustrated. "I don't understand. Is something under the house? Should I call a plumber?" Nexus shook its head, a very human gesture it had picked up over the past year, and padded over to Rachel's school backpack, nosing at it insistently. The following morning, James decided to drive Rachel to school himself, despite Nexus's increasingly agitated behavior. He figured that seeing Rachel safely to her classroom might help calm the alien dog's protective instincts. As they approached the school building, however, James noticed something odd. The normally bustling parking lot was almost empty, and there was an unusual stillness about the place. Nexus, who had refused to stay home and was now sitting in the back seat, began that bone-shaking growl again. This time, James paid closer attention to his pet's behavior. The alien dog wasn't just making noise, it was trying to create a specific vibration pattern. As the growl continued, James noticed something extraordinary. The asphalt of the parking lot seemed to shimmer, like the surface of water disturbed by sound waves. "Rachel, stay in the car," James ordered, his voice tight with sudden anxiety. He stepped out, and the morning air felt wrong somehow, too thick, as if the oxygen content had changed. Nexus bounded out after him, its fur now a storm of crimson and black, all 6 eyes fixed on the school building. As James watched, hairline cracks appeared in the school's foundation, spreading like a web across the concrete. But these weren't ordinary stress fractures, they seemed to pulse with an internal light, and through them came a sound that made his blood run cold, a low, mechanical hum that reminded him terribly of the night Nexus's pod had crashed in his yard. The truth hit him with stunning clarity. Nexus hadn't been trying to keep Rachel from school, it had been trying to keep her away from whatever lay beneath it. And now, as the cracks widened and that otherworldly hum grew louder, James realized that his alien dog's warnings had come too late. The ground began to shake, and from deep below came a sound that would haunt James's dreams for years to come, the awakening of something that should have remained buried, something that Nexus had been desperately trying to warn them about all along. The evacuation of Portland's western suburbs happened with surprising efficiency, though James suspected that had more to do with panic than good planning. Within hours of the incident at Rachel's school, military vehicles had swarmed the area, and residents were being strongly encouraged to relocate to emergency shelters. James hadn't waited for official evacuation orders. The moment those strange lights had started pulsing through the cracks in the school's foundation, he'd grabbed Rachel and driven straight home, throwing essential supplies into his old camping backpack while Nexus prowled the perimeter of the house, its fur now a constant swirl of warning colors. They'd made it to his sister Myra's house in Seattle by nightfall. A former Marine turned mechanical engineer, Myra took one look at Nexus's agitated state and immediately cleared out her basement workshop for them. "So," she said, after Rachel had finally fallen asleep upstairs, "want to tell me why your alien dog looks like a living warning light?" James ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "Something's under the school. Under the whole town, maybe. Nexus tried to warn us, but I didn't understand until it was too late." He described the strange cracks, the mechanical humming, and the way the air had felt wrong. Mira listened without interrupting, her dark eyes narrowing as she absently fiddled with the prosthetic hand she'd designed for herself after her service injury. "Your dog," she said finally, "it crashed here last year, right? During that meteor shower?" When James nodded, she continued, "That wasn't just a shower. The military called it a debris field, but nothing natural moves the way those objects did. They were searching for something." Nexus, who had been lying quietly in the corner, suddenly lifted its head. Its 6 eyes focused on Myra's television, which flickered to life without anyone touching it. The screen showed static at first, then resolved into a pattern that made James's head hurt to look at it. Geometric shapes appeared and disappeared too quickly to follow, but somehow they left impressions in his mind, images of vast underground chambers, machinery that moved like living things, and creatures that existed in more dimensions than his brain could process. "They're not just under the school," James whispered as understanding dawned. "They're building something. Some kind of network." The word felt inadequate for what Nexus was showing them, but it was the closest his human mind could come to comprehending it. Myra's prosthetic hand whirred as she clenched it into a fist. "A network of what?" Before James could answer, Rachel's scream pierced the night. He bolted upstairs, taking the steps 3 at a time, Nexus somehow reaching the bedroom door before him despite starting from the basement. Inside, they found Rachel standing by the window, pointing at the sky. The stars were going out. No, James realized with growing horror, they weren't going out, they were being blocked. Something massive was moving through the upper atmosphere, its surface seemingly able to bend light around it. As they watched, a section of the thing became briefly visible, its surface rippling like liquid metal before disappearing again. "It's starting," Rachel said, her voice strange and distant. "They're all connecting now. The pieces are finding each other." She turned to look at them, and James felt his heart stop. His daughter's eyes were glowing with the same internal light they'd seen pulsing through the cracks at her school. Nexus moved forward, pressing its head against Rachel's hand. The alien dog's fur shifted through patterns James had never seen before, creating shapes that seemed to answer the geometric patterns they'd seen on the television. Rachel gasped, her eyes returning to normal as she stumbled backward. "Dad," she whispered, "I could see them. All of them. They're everywhere, under every city, and they're almost ready." "Ready for what?" Mira demanded, but James already knew the answer. He'd seen it in those impossible patterns, felt it in the wrongness of the air at the school. "Transformation," he said quietly. "They're going to transform the Earth. Make it like wherever they came from." He looked at Nexus, remembering how the alien dog had crashed in his yard. "You weren't just lost, were you? You were trying to warn us." Nexus's fur rippled in confirmation, and James felt that familiar pressure in his mind. But this time, instead of vague impressions, he received a clear message: there was a way to stop it, but they'd need help. More importantly, they'd need to get back into the quarantine zone they'd just fled. Outside, more sections of the thing in the sky became visible, its massive form gradually taking shape as it descended toward Earth. They had perhaps days, if they were lucky. Hours, if they weren't. James looked at his daughter, still shaking from her brief connection to whatever lay beneath their feet, then at his sister, whose military experience and engineering skills might be their only hope, and finally at Nexus, the alien dog who had tried so hard to prevent all of this. "Tell us what we need to do," he said to Nexus. "Tell us how to fight them." Getting back into the quarantine zone proved easier than expected, though not in a way that brought them any comfort. The military blockades they'd passed on their way out were abandoned, vehicles left standing empty on the roads like discarded toys. The few civilians they encountered were all heading away from Portland, their faces masks of terror. "The soldiers just left?" Rachel asked from the back seat of Myra's reinforced Jeep, where she sat with Nexus pressed protectively against her side. "Not left," Mira corrected grimly, her prosthetic hand tight on the steering wheel. "Taken. Look at the ground." In the pre-dawn light, they could see faint luminescent trails leading from the abandoned vehicles toward the city center, as if something had dragged the soldiers away while leaving behind traces of itself. Nexus's fur pulsed with rapid patterns of red and black, its 6 eyes scanning constantly. Through their strengthening mental connection, James could sense the alien dog's growing anxiety. Whatever lay ahead was worse than even Nexus had anticipated. They parked the Jeep several blocks from Rachel's school, which had become the epicenter of strange phenomena. The building itself was barely visible through a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but impossibly dense and somehow wrong. "We need to get inside," James said, checking the backpack of equipment Mira had assembled. "Nexus says there's something in the basement, some kind of control node. If we can disable it. If we can disable it, we might disrupt their whole network," Mira finished. She pulled a device from her jacket pocket that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a medical scanner. "I modified this from some of my prosthetics' neural interface components. It should help us detect and possibly interact with their technology." Rachel suddenly grabbed James's arm. "Dad, look!" She pointed to a nearby storm drain, where a soft blue light was pulsing in rhythm with the distortion around the school. As they watched, a tendril of what looked like liquid metal emerged from the drain, testing the air like a snake's tongue before retreating. "They're using our infrastructure," Mira realized. "Sewers, subway tunnels, utility conduits, they've basically turned our own city's circulatory system against us." Nexus led them through back alleys and side streets, avoiding the main roads where the luminescent trails were most concentrated. The alien dog's fur had developed new patterns now, complex swirls that seemed to bend the light around them. James realized it was trying to camouflage them, matching its protective field to the alien distortions that filled the air. They reached the school's rear entrance without incident, but getting inside proved challenging. The door wasn't just locked, it had been partially absorbed into the wall, the metal and concrete flowing together like melted wax. "Stand back," Mira said, pulling something that looked suspiciously like a shaped charge from her backpack. At James's alarmed look, she shrugged. "Some habits die hard. Besides, I had a feeling we'd need more than a lockpick." The explosion was surprisingly quiet, more of a sharp pop than a bang, but it opened a hole large enough for them to squeeze through. Inside, the school had become something out of a nightmare. The floors and walls rippled with subtle movement, and every surface was covered in a fine network of glowing lines that pulsed in complex patterns. "It's like a circuit board," Rachel whispered, her eyes wide. "But alive." She reached out to touch one of the lines, but Nexus quickly pulled her back with a gentle but firm bite on her sleeve. They made their way to the basement stairs, following Nexus's lead. The alien dog's fur was now emitting a soft counterpoint pulse to the patterns around them, and James noticed that wherever they walked, the alien circuitry seemed to momentarily dim, as if retreating from Nexus's influence. The basement level was worse. The entire space had been transformed into something that defied human architecture. Organic-looking pylons of living metal stretched from floor to ceiling, each one threaded through with those same pulsing lines of light. In the center of the room stood what could only be the control node, a towering crystalline structure that hurt the eyes to look at directly. "This is it," Mira said, consulting her modified scanner. "The energy readings are off the charts. It's like it's pulling power from somewhere else. Somewhere that doesn't exist in our space." Nexus stepped forward, its fur now blazing with patterns so complex they made James's head spin. The alien dog looked back at them, and James felt a clear message in his mind: now comes the hard part. Before anyone could ask what that meant, a section of the wall suddenly liquefied, flowing aside to reveal a figure that had James stumbling backward in horror. It looked human, but only in the way a reflection in a broken mirror looks like the original: fragmented, distorted, wrong. Its skin rippled with the same circuits they'd seen throughout the building, and its eyes. Its eyes were windows into somewhere else, somewhere vast and cold and utterly alien. "Welcome," it said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We've been expecting you. After all, we've been watching you ever since your little scout arrived." The thing turned its impossible eyes on Nexus, and James felt his heart sink as he realized they'd just walked straight into a trap. The distorted figure stepped forward, its movements too smooth to be natural, as if it were flowing rather than walking. James instinctively pushed Rachel behind him, while Myra's prosthetic hand reconfigured itself into something that looked decidedly more weapon-like. "Scout?" James managed to say, looking at Nexus. The alien dog's fur had settled into a steady pulse of deep purple, neither afraid nor aggressive. Through their mental link, James felt not fear, but a grim sort of determination. "Oh, yes," the figure said, its voice still coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Did you think it was coincidence that brought your little friend to your backyard? We've been seeding worlds with observers for millennia. Watching, waiting, judging whether the indigenous species were suitable." "Suitable for what?" Mira demanded, her modified hand humming with potential energy. The figure's face rippled into something that might have been trying to be a smile. "Preservation, of course. You see, your world is dying. Your species is killing it, inch by inch, degree by degree. We simply offer an alternative." Through their connection, James suddenly received a flood of images from Nexus, countless worlds transformed by the same technology they saw around them, their organic ecosystems replaced by this hybrid of biology and machine. But these weren't images of destruction, they were images of adaptation, of survival through profound change. "You're trying to save us," Rachel whispered, stepping out from behind James. Her eyes had begun to glow again, but this time she didn't seem afraid. "But you're doing it wrong. You're taking away our choice. The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle. Choice. When a child is about to touch a hot stove, do you give them the choice to burn themselves? We are far older than your species, child. We have seen civilizations rise and fall. We know what comes next in your story. No, James said, finally understanding. You think you know. That's why you sent Nexus, not just to observe, but to learn. And what did you learn? He turned to his alien companion. What did you tell them about us? Nexus stepped forward, its fur now shifting through colors so rapidly it looked like a living aurora. The crystalline control node in the center of the room responded, its patterns shifting to match Nexus's display. The distorted figure's expression changed to something like concern. Impossible, it said, its voice losing its otherworldly resonance for a moment. The Scout's programming is absolute. It cannot. Cannot what? Mira asked, a fierce grin spreading across her face. Cannot choose. Cannot change. Cannot learn to care about us as individuals rather than just a species to be preserved. The alien construct's form began to destabilize, its edges becoming fuzzy and uncertain. The transformation cannot be stopped. The network is complete. Soon, your entire world will be optimized, protected, saved from itself. About that, Mira said, raising her modified scanner. While you were monologuing, I've been analyzing your network. It's impressive, a quantum-entangled web of nanoscale processors, using our planet's magnetic field as a power source. But you made one crucial mistake. We do not make mistakes, the figure insisted, though it sounded less certain. You did, Rachel said softly. You taught Nexus to love us. At that moment, Nexus threw back its head and began to emit that bone-shaking growl again. But this time, instead of just sound, it was broadcasting something through its fur's bioluminescent display, a cascade of patterns that made the control node spark and flutter. A virus, Mira breathed, watching the readings on her scanner. No, a choice. Nexus is giving your network the ability to choose. The figure staggered, its form becoming more unstable by the second. Choice is inefficient. Choice leads to chaos. Choice. Choice is what makes us human, James finished. And maybe that's what you really need to save worlds, not perfect efficiency, but the messy, complicated ability to choose a better way. The control node was fully engaged now, its crystalline surface blazing with the same patterns as Nexus's fur. Through the walls, they could hear a deep rumbling as the change propagated through the network. The distorted figure reached out one last time, its form unraveling. What have you done? We haven't done anything, James said. We've just given your network the same thing you accidentally gave Nexus, the freedom to choose whether humanity needs to be forcibly preserved, or whether we deserve the chance to save ourselves. As the figure dissolved completely, the rumbling grew louder. The walls began to shift and flow, but instead of the alien geometries from before, they were returning to their original form. Through the basement windows, they could see the massive shape in the sky beginning to fragment, breaking apart into countless smaller pieces that streaked away like a reverse meteor shower. Nexus collapsed, its fur settling into a peaceful blue glow. Rachel rushed to the alien dog's side, cradling its head in her lap. Is it over? She asked. James looked at Mira, who was checking her scanner with a frown of concentration. The network is changing. Not shutting down, but transforming into something else. Something new. Something chosen, James said quietly, kneeling beside Nexus. Through their mental link, he could feel his alien friend's exhaustion, but also its satisfaction. It had completed its mission, just not in the way its creators had intended. And as the sun began to rise over Portland, casting long shadows through windows that were once again just windows, James realized that maybe that was the point all along. Sometimes the best way to save something isn't to preserve it in amber, but to give it the freedom to save itself. 3 months after the incident at the school, life in Portland had achieved a new kind of normal. The military quarantine had been lifted, though researchers still occasionally visited to study the lingering traces of alien technology. The massive ship that had loomed over the city was gone, along with its network of transformation machinery, but it had left behind something far more valuable than its technology. It had left behind its knowledge. James sat in his backyard, watching Rachel play fetch with Nexus. The alien dog's fur still shifted colors, but now it seemed to respond more to emotions than any computational purpose. Currently, it was a warm golden color that James had come to associate with contentment. "Still hard to believe sometimes, isn't it?" Mira said, joining him on the porch. She'd moved into a house down the street after the incident, her expertise in human-alien technology interface making her invaluable to the various research teams that now operated in the area. "Which part?" James asked. "The part where aliens tried to forcibly upgrade our planet, or the part where my dog talked them out of it?" Mira laughed, her prosthetic hand absently tapping against her coffee mug. The hand itself was different now, upgraded with some of the principles they'd learned from the alien technology, but still fundamentally human in design and purpose. "Both, I guess. But mostly I'm amazed at how well we've adapted. Humans are surprisingly resilient when it comes to paradigm shifts." She wasn't wrong. The world had changed after the attempted transformation, but not in the way the aliens had planned. Instead of a forced evolution, humanity had been given a choice, and they'd chosen to learn. The alien network, before it dissolved, had left behind vast archives of knowledge about sustainable technology, ecological preservation, and the delicate balance between progress and conservation. "Dad!" Rachel called out, running up to the porch with Nexus at her side. "Nexus wants to show you something." Her eyes glowed briefly, a lasting effect of her connection to the alien network, but one that now manifested only when she chose to use it. James opened his mind to Nexus's communication, something that had become easier with practice. The alien dog shared a series of images, other ships, similar to the one that had appeared over Portland, approaching distant worlds. But instead of bringing transformation machinery, they carried knowledge, options, choices. "They really did change, didn't they?" James said softly, reaching down to scratch behind Nexus's ears. "Your people, I mean. They learned from you, just like you learned from us." Nexus's fur rippled with patterns of blue and green, and James felt a sense of affirmation. The aliens hadn't given up on their mission to save worlds, but they'd fundamentally changed their approach. Instead of forcing change, they now offered guidance, leaving each civilization to choose its own path. "Ms. Rodriguez at school says we're already implementing some of their clean energy concepts," Rachel said, sitting on the porch steps. "And the way they manipulated matter? It's helping us figure out how to clean up the oceans and reduce pollution. We're doing it our way, though. Not all at once, but step by step." Mira nodded. "That's the real victory here. Not just stopping them from transforming us, but showing them, and ourselves, that humanity is capable of transforming itself, given the chance." A distant rumble drew their attention to the sky. For a moment, James tensed, memories of that massive alien ship still fresh in his mind. But it was just a conventional aircraft, one of the new models that incorporated some of the alien principles of sustainable propulsion. "We're getting better," he said, watching the plane disappear into the clouds. "Not perfect, not transformed, but better. One choice at a time." Nexus pressed against his leg, fur shimmering with that peaceful golden glow. Through their connection, James felt not just contentment, but pride. Pride in humanity's progress, pride in its own role in that progress, and most of all, pride in the family it had chosen. Rachel hugged the alien dog, and James saw tears in her eyes. "You're not going to have to leave us, are you? Now that everything's changed?" Nexus's response came through clearly to all of them, a firm sense of belonging, of home, of family. The aliens might have sent it to Earth as a scout, but it had found something far more valuable than information about a species to be preserved. It had found people worth protecting, worth loving, worth choosing. As the sun set over Portland, casting the city in shades of gold and purple that reminded James of Nexus's fur, he reflected on how close they'd come to losing everything. Not just their world, but their humanity, the very thing that made them worth saving in the first place. The aliens had come to preserve humanity but had instead been transformed by it, learning that true preservation isn't about freezing something in time, but about giving it room to grow, to change, to choose. And as Nexus chased Rachel around the yard one more time before dinner, its fur painting trails of light in the gathering dusk, James knew that some choices, like taking in a strange dog that fell from the sky, were the kind that changed not just one world, but many.